Episode 1 of Down Cemetery Road begins in South Oxford with an introduction to Sarah Tucker. She works as an art conservationist and she certainly knows her stuff. Along with being intelligent, she's also supportive of her husband Mark, who's nervous as the bank's top client Gerard Inchon is coming over for dinner with his wife Paula. Things are made a little more awkward though when Wigwam and Rufus show and Sarah burns the food. The whole dinner takes a turn for the worst when Sarah and Gerard butt heads over the idea of kids. However, just before things really kick off, an explosion rocks the house. A building across town explodes and sends shockwaves across this small sleepy community. Firefighters believe it's a burst gas main, and while details are hazy, it seems like the only survivor is a little girl living inside that house. She survived purely from the wardrobe landing on top of her with the doors open. It's a miracle she's even alive, but she's rushed off to the hospital. Now, this girl happens to be the same little girl that Sarah bumped into on the way home from work a little earlier in the episode. At least, that's what Sarah thinks. Sarah heads to the hospital to drop off a note that Wigwam's kids have written for Dina. The hospital staff aren't particularly helpful and not forthright in giving out information. In fact, they're actually quite hostile and usher her out the building. This only rouses more suspicions though. At this point, we're introduced to government agent Hamza Malik. He works in intelligence and threats. He shows up at work in a rather cheerful mood, but is quickly chewed out for it. The cover story of the gas explosion in this small town is just that, a cover. In reality, Hamza and his department are behind the incendiary used during a covert operation that's gone horribly wrong. Hamza is forced by his superior, called C, to mop this mess up for all their sakes. And news of Sarah nosing around also reaches the government here, who decide to keep a close eye on her. The thing is, the cover-up has already begun, and Sarah realises she stumbled right into the middle of it all without even trying. She discovers a doctored image of the police outside the exploded house. Now, one official picture without the child, but Sarah holds that same image with Dina in. Now, given Sarah's restoration expertise, she can see residual traces of the image having been doctored. Now, Sarah shows up at the police with this, where she learns that Dina's file is apparently flagged, which means it's off limits. Now, Sarah stumbles upon the private investigative office of Zoe Brom and Joe Silverman next, and they're married PIs with a very imaginative business name of Oxford Investigations. And they're eking out a living with little cases to try and pay the bills, but nothing that tasty has really come across their desk. Zoe is clearly resentful of her husband too, while Joe is just trying to get by. That is until Sarah shows up. As Sarah brings the Dina case across to Joe, who learns that the reason she's so invested in this is because Dina reminds her of the sort of inquisitive child she used to be back in the day. This could be just the break they need, and Joe intends to head down the pub to scout out the nurses. However, he's chewed out by Zoe, who doesn't think this is a particularly good allocation of resources. Seeing how disappointed her husband is though, she does backtrack a little, telling him to check the crime scene instead. Hamza catches wind of what's happening with the PIs in Oxford and scrambles to try and get Dina moved so he can lock this situation down. While this is going on, Gerard actually does help Sarah a little by using his contacts at the hospital to check on Dina. Apparently she'll be in ICU for a few more days before being moved. However, he also warns that things for Mark are not going too well at work, given he's out of his depth in shark-infested waters. As we find out later in the episode, Gerard's reason for being in the hospital has nothing to do with Dina, it actually centres on his wife losing their baby. Elsewhere, after buying a round of drinks at the bar, which doesn't help Joe's financial situation in the slightest, Joe rings Sarah and lets her know what he's found out. Now, someone has signed Dina's discharge summary and told the nurse to pack the kid a bag. Only nobody seems to know where she's being moved to, except that she's being moved that very night. Now, Sarah senses an opportunity here and decides to leave, scouting South Oxford Hospital and watching what happens. And when she gets there, she spies that familiar man from earlier in the episode and chases him through the hospital to the ICU. As Sarah hits the fire alarm to cause chaos and scrambles to find Dina outside. When she's loaded up into a car, Sarah gives chase on her bicycle, but she's run off by a white van driven by that same mysterious guy from before. Realising she's onto something big, Sarah shows up back at the PI office to see Joe, only there's a problem. She's shocked when she finds that he's actually dead. His wrists have been slashed and it's been made to look like a suicide. So Down Cemetery Road looks set to bring two powerhouse actresses together into one explosive espionage thriller format. Now, based on this first episode, it certainly looks like this could be a good one. Ruth Wilson was excellent in both Luther and His Dark Materials, to name but a few of her prolific shows, and she brings that same gravitas to her role in this series too. Now, Emma Thompson obviously needs absolutely no introduction here, and while her role in this first episode is brief, the show appears to be similarly channeling the same vibes of Jackson Lamb in Slow Horses. And that's, of course, perhaps unsurprising, given that this is also based on a Mick Herron set of novels. However, the tone and style in Down Cemetery Road feels much more closely aligned to shows like Prime Target or The Capture, but hopefully this series has a far better ending to either of those two. But with another episode already released, thankfully we don't have to wait too long to find out what happens next. Roll on episode 2. Thanks for watching, and do let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Smash a like or subscribe to the channel, your support is very much appreciated. I'm Greg Wheeler, and from all of us over here at The Review Geek, we'll see you on the next video.